Next on the Capital Cable, a discussion of what's going on with North Korea. New season of Capital Cable 2024-2025 coming next. Welcome, everybody, to a new season of the CSIS Capital Cable. Victor Cha here with you, Senior Vice President for Asia and Korea Chair at CSIS, Professor at Georgetown. Just in case you did not know, I am not Mark Lippert. Mark Lippert is still our revered host for the show, but he is actually on his way from the airport to a phone booth or someplace where he can plug in and join us. So he'll be joining us momentarily. But that's not going to stop us from starting with episode number 98 of the Capital Cable. And I said the beginning of the 2024-2025 new season. We hope you all had a good summer. We had a nice break. And now we're back to talk about the very serious and perennial topic of North Korea. And joining us here today, we could not bring together. We thought for the first episode coming back, we had to really bring back the best experts possible on this, and we really have assembled them for this episode. So you all are very familiar with our good friend Sidney Seiler. Sid Seiler was formerly National Intelligence Officer for North Korea, spent some time on the NSC as well as out in the region, a wealth of experience on North Korea, and actually not one of the few, because there's another person on the show who's like that too. Someone who has worked both, all three of you actually have worked both on the IC side and the policy side when it comes to North Korea. So Sid is also a non-resident senior advisor with us here in the Korea Chair at CSIS. Sid, it's great to have you back on the Capital Cable.
Victor, thank you for that introduction.
Also joining us is Katrin Katz. Dr. Katrin Katz is now a professor at the University of Miami, teaching international relations in Asia. Formerly on the NSC, director for Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Oceanic Affairs. Formerly in the intelligence community. Also had spent time at State working for Kristen Silverberg, among others. Katrin is also a non-resident senior fellow with us at CSIS in the Korea Chair. Katrin, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks so much, Victor. Great to be here with you all.
And certainly last but not least, Jung Pak. Jung Pak, formerly Korea Chair at Brookings, at the Brookings Institution, and then just came off a stint as senior official for North Korea. I know I'm messing up the title. Senior official for North Korea, also Deputy Assistant Secretary for, it was China and Global Affairs, I think. You wore a number of hats during your time at EAP. It's great. It's really great to have Jung on the show. She we've caught her as she's decompressing from her from her years in government, and it's really great to have her on the show as well. We have to figure out some way to get her affiliated with us at the Korea Chair too. So Jung, great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks. Good to see everybody.
Great. So why don't we get started? The topic, of course, today is North Korea. I think one of our last episodes before the summer break, we were talking about North Korea as well. It's hard not to talk about North Korea. So I thought we'd start with Sid, and maybe Sid, you can sort of get us up to date about what has happened over the past few weeks and what we should be looking out for. So Sid, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victor. I assume a large part of our audience follows this very closely, so I'll be very brief in kind of looking at three major lines of effort, if we could call it that, in terms of North Korea's development of its WMD program, its approach toward the Republic of Korea or South Korea, and then finally its approach towards the United States or its broader diplomacy. As far as the WMD program, we're seeing the launches, we're seeing the testing, we're seeing that evidence that Kim Jong-un continues to pursue qualitative and quantitative growth of his program. And as he rolls out these various types of new tactical missile launches, or hints at a new ICBM, or demonstrates, shows the world parts of his uranium enrichment program, it's all designed to fit the narrative that the program is not anywhere near reaching his point of conclusion, or any point of termination at which Kim is satisfied with his deterrent and he can actually sit down and rest. So, again, to include this deployment of 250 of these shorter range ballistic missiles to forward line units, adding on to the classic development and demonstration actions that he takes. Now we're seeing a deployment of these. And I can only imagine that when you think about the various dimensions of the program, in terms of whether it's fissile material production, it's ballistic missiles in the short, medium, intermediate, intercontinental range, or other aspects, there's still a lot that Kim will be able to demonstrate and give that impression of a constantly advancing, nothing you can do about it pursuit of growing his nuclear arsenal. And of course, in addition to the things we see, it's also important to think about the things that we do not see. I heard a lot of the reaction, for example, to the uranium enrichment program pictures was the thought that, oh my goodness, this reflects a growth of the program. Well, it's a growth of the program in terms of how Kim is portraying it to the world, but it's not in any way, reflective of the fact that, there's a facility we had not known about, and now suddenly Kim's threats of exponential growth of the program are real. It's slow and steady, but real, and so it really requires watching it. The second line of effort is this approach towards South Korea, which started at the beginning of the year, when North Korea said they're no longer pursuing unification. There are two Koreas. In fact, we'll call them the Republic of Korea, just so we avoid giving any impression we still consider ourselves somehow linked and just divided by names of North and South. Kim has called the Republic of Korea their most dangerous and first enemy state. He has stated that it is now the DPRK policy to actually occupy and subjugate the Republic of Korea in time of emergency. For those who thought that this two Korea formula might give Kim an opportunity simply to ignore the South for a protracted period of time, none of his objectives in terms of establishing and using military superiority over South Korea have changed. He has called the Northern Limit Line illegal and intolerable, and warned that a future Supreme People's Assembly meeting may look at constitutional revision regarding the boundaries and borders of North Korea that kind of seems to be laying both the legal and the kind of the ideological foundation for some type of challenge of the Northern Limit Line. We know that we have a long history of West Sea naval clashes. We see a heightened tension during blue crab season, which comes, kind of in the spring. So there's many months before that. But I think this is one area that we need to be particularly concerned about, that Kim Jong-un is setting up the South for some type of provocation that would really put it in a jam as far as defending its territorial integrity. And finally, in the third realm, we still have this, what I call New World Order confidence. It's a confidence that things are going well on the international stage, that this emergence of a new bloc with Russia, China, Iran, and others who challenge the U.S.-led rules-based order, that the environment for him to live as he wishes to live, as this nuclear power outside of the NPT, outside of the international system, that things are trending well for him, and that he can go for a protracted period of time without interactions with the South, without diplomacy with the United States, because he's got other paths that he can pursue, in particular this relationship with Russia, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more deeply as we go on. I would assess Kim and his fellow advisors are likely both confused and bemused with the U.S. election. But I think that if we dwell too much on who Kim might desire to be the victor, I think we're missing the point that Kim has developed a diplomatic strategy now, as Chung knows so frustratingly well, that allows him to ignore and not engage the United States for a protracted period of time. And there's nothing in the cards that would suggest any different, regardless of the outcome of the election. But again, I'm sure we'll have a deeper discussion of that as well. So that's kind of my broad outline of where I think we are with North Korea.
Great, Sid. That's really a great place for us to start. There's a lot of, you put out a lot of things that we can chew on. Let me just ask you one follow-up question, and that is, previously on the show, we've talked about the possibility of some sort of October surprise by North Korea. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think, like, as we've talked about before, our data, CSIS data suggests that there is a relationship between our elections and more belligerence by North Korea. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think you said they're setting up the South for something, but are they setting us up for something given our elections?
And first, a quick hello to Mark.
Oh yeah, Mark's on. Hey, he looks like you're in a padded room somewhere.
Either that or the Delta Lounge at National. So both areas. So yeah, a padded room would be a more fitting of my personality. So there you go. It's all good. It's all good.
I was thinking underground bunker too.
Yeah.
So Victor, on that question, and it's good. I mean, I've been involved in warning, and I think both Katrin and Chung too, and at some point in the past have had to answer the question, what are the top 10 bad things North Korea could do between now and X date? And it's what you warn of depends upon your audience. Because you'll have some customers who will want to know the full range of things that could go bad so that they can prepare for them. Others would like it narrowed down, like what's really possible. And I can't help but default, to my own experiences, looking first of all at the Bush to Obama transition, where, yes, somewhat complicated, because in the middle of that, Kim Jong-un had a cardiac incident that kind of may have affected the timing, but of what they had planned, rather than punishing the outgoing administration or seeking to influence the election. What we saw in that case was what they had planned, which was a Taepodong launch and a nuclear test, was going to be held during the new administration to kind of set the stage for the ensuing 4 years. And even between Obama 1 and Obama 2, we see the same type of timing where they watched for the election. The election, obviously, Barack Obama was reelected. And then we saw after that a 12 December Taepodong launch and then a nuclear test in the new year. Long way of saying that if they've got something really big and attention grabbing that is designed to, impact North Korea policy more than necessarily try to impact the election, something that would impact North Korea policy for the coming years, they would wait until the administration with whom they will have to deal was actually seated and in place. It's a lot of bad things short of that they could do, and I think our attention, our alertness toward the possibility of some other October surprise is certainly justified. But for me, it seems like the bigger ticket things, including a potential seventh nuclear test, would come after the election and after the inauguration. Uranium enrichment, very subtle, subtle way of putting out there. Oh, by the way, well, all of you have been debating whether we have a uranium enrichment program. Let us show you how advanced it is, right? So it doesn't really escalate tension. It doesn't really require a response, to be honest, an immediate response. It's subtle things like that between now and the election, and then kind of the bigger ticket item, whatever they have planned to really try to shape the next 4 years, would make sense to wait until after they know who's going to be in power.
Great, thanks so much. So, Mark, I'm going to turn it back over to you. We were doing our initial around the horn, and Sid sort of did his first and talked about the qualitative, quantitative improvements in WMD, the the policy towards South Korea possibly setting up for some sort of action against South Korea, and then the lack of interest in any dialogue with the United States. So over to you, and Katrin and Jung have not yet had a chance to weigh in. So.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Victor. Thanks for taking over here for me while I fought through delays and a bad seat next to the bathroom on the plane. But anyway, I digress. Maybe over to Jung. Jung, your thoughts on this bucket of issues? Where are we? What's likely to happen in the run-up? And then we'll turn to Katrin.
Thanks, Mark, and it's great to be with you all. I can't, as with many of these North Korea-related discussions, really kudos to Sid for continuing to provide such such cogent observations and analyses of what's going on. And as in other circumstances too, I can't agree with him more on what we're seeing, the drivers for what we're seeing, and what we might anticipate. What I would highlight for the audience is how much of this, so we've been together and talking with each other and working with each other for a really long time in Washington and beyond, analyzing North Korea from a very Korean Peninsula perspective. What I think has been really striking, and I think somewhat different from how we've been looking at this issue, is Sid's third observation about this new world order confidence, and how what we had been doing in the US government and for my role at the State Department is to really globalize this issue, that because of this new order confidence, because of how these various plates have been settling, the Russia, the China, the US, and strategic competition, war in Ukraine, what's going on in the Middle East, that how all of these, and of course, the renewed relationship between Russia and North Korea has really made this into a global issue. And I think the way we look at this issue has to be from that global perspective, and our policy responses also have to be from a global perspective. One of the things that I kept getting challenged on when I was in the administration was, nothing is happening, nothing is going on, you're not doing anything on North Korea. And that was based on the assumption that, or the preference to see diplomacy, direct diplomacy with the DPRK as action, right? But as I reminded audiences and other interlocutors, there is a lot going on, and a lot of that was in that global perspective, the global efforts. With the UN Security Council being what it is, a shambles of its former, a shell of its former self, that has eroded the sanctions regime, and that has absolutely required a lot more legwork and the gardening and the spade work to convince, to cajole a host of other countries, particularly in the global South, about the dangers of this relationship, that North Korea is not just our problem, but that it's a global problem. So I think, our policy responses have to be global in nature, and it has to be done from a way that that is tailored to the audience, whether it's non-proliferation, whether it's human rights, and North Korea is all of those things. Of course, the war in Ukraine, of course, is another tailored approach. But just wanted to remind the audience, and I know this group knows well, that this is a global problem that requires a global policy response.
All right, outstanding, Jung. One follow-up to you then, given that it is a global problem, and given your, I think, very good comments about the Security Council and the problems there, there was a time not too long ago where you could argue that the diplomatic and military space was winnowing for North Korea, right? You had sectoral-wide sanctions at the Security Council. You had, I would argue, pretty increasingly effective diplomacy across the global South on things like North Korean labor, on some of these construction projects. Where are we now on that bucket of issues? It seems like they've got more breathing room, perhaps, you tell me, and then the implications for their behavior in the coming weeks and months based on that freedom of action or lack thereof. Jung, back to you.
Yeah, and this is something that I reminded all of my interlocutors, particularly from the big countries, that North Korea comes to the table when there's unity of action, right? And so and we go back to 2017, 2018, and 2016, where the Security Council was united. Russia and China voted for these very stringent, never before seen sectoral sanctions that sought to constrain, squeeze, and choke North Korea's revenue generation activities. But with this new world order, that new world order confidence that Sid has talked about so well, I think that is derived from the fact that they now have that security relationship with Russia, and as well as the potential for greater economic security from Russia. Now, I don't think that Russia in this century or beyond is going to match what China can offer in terms of economic security. But that said, it does provide the time and the space and the potential for North Korea to benefit or to cultivate those various potential economic opportunities. And so, when we talk about Russia and North Korea and I think it does open up a lot of diplomatic space for North Korea. I mean, Choi Sun-hee is where she went to some BRICS women's forum. Now, Moscow still has a lot of partners and friends around the world. They have these regional and international organizations, economic security and otherwise. And that really provides the space for North Korea to not look like a pariah state, right? But to look like a legitimate anti-West, part of this, value-added coalition, adding value to this coalition of anti-West countries and those that are flirting with anti-West tendencies. So I think it does open up. I think it remains to be seen, like how this is all going to provide a payout for the North Koreans. But that said, I do think that there are more opportunities than they had back in 2019 for North Korea to reap the benefits, the potential benefits from this new world order.
Outstanding, Jung. Really appreciate the analysis. I thought you were going to use, instead of payout, you're going to use taebak, jackpot. Anyway, but Kat, thanks for the excellent analysis and follow up as well. Katrin, you've been waiting entirely too long. Apologies for that, but I've seen you nodding along. Why don't I'm just going to throw it to you? Take it whichever direction you want to go to, because I know there's a lot to unpack here, but it'd be interesting to hear your take, A, on an intervention in your own right, and B, any reaction to the previous two interventions as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I'm nodding because, there's so many things here that teed up things so well. I agree fully with these analyses. I appreciate the depth that both Sid and Jung went into. Just to kind of, I guess, weave the two threads together, Sid's 3 lines of effort, I think the value of always Sid's contributions are the longevity of time watching these issues. Sid, I backbenched many of your talks along these lines, and I remember them well. And so for so many years, I have heard this wisdom, which you now can bring us to the present day and say a lot of this is ongoing, consistent lines of effort. But then to bring Jung's, very important point in under new context, right? In this new global dimension, having a lot to do with Russia as well as China's, kind of realignment in recent years. And of course, Jung had the the challenge of serving in that time frame. So a lot of this maybe complaints around what is the U.S. doing had to do a lot with, well, what are the options when you can't go to the UNSC any longer because you have 2 vetoes, right? So the combination of the two brings us to the present day, which I see as, North Korea acting with new boldness due to its very keen awareness of top cover, right? Particularly from Russia, but also from China. And so it's some new news and some old news. It's missile tests. It's provocative statements. Some of that doesn't even make it into the headlines anymore because we've seen so much of it. But there's also these really kind of out there things like sending out photos of a visit to a uranium enrichment facility. I mean, this is a heavily UNSC sanctioned site, right? And that they are so bold to go and brazenly show these photos to the world, right? You can ask yourselves without that top cover, would they ever have done that, right? Do other countries tend to do that with uranium enrichment sites, right? So it's a mix of old and new, which of course brings new challenges. There's a lot of new things that North Korea can get away with. But one kind of twist I would add, maybe throw into the conversation as well, is maybe just an unknown out there. Like, how rock solid is this top cover, right? How short term, how long term, right? You can kind of paint out these scenarios where it's like Russia's support is really has been contingent really on Ukrainian conflict. That's where it came from. That's where China and Russia's new alignment came from. On the other hand, there's, this alignment in kind of global view, this world order. They're all, this challenge to the US-led world order and this, I guess, vague concept of a different world order that they're supporting. So that would be a longer term alignment type of thing. And of course, the Putin and Kim summit brought out this statement that very much looked like a long-term commitment in terms of that treaty, right? That commitment in the context of war that they would both defend each other. But in terms of looking at that dynamics between China, Russia, and North Korea, how steadfast is that? Because how much does Russia really want North Korea how much does China want North Korea and Russia to get really out far, ahead of their skis and moving things forward? China does not share the kind of this appetite for chaos, right? China does not like instability in the region. So it's really, it's not a strong triangle. I mean, on the other side of the ledger with the US, ROK, and Japan, we're really trying to make the 3 legs strong. That's where our strength comes from. On their side of the ledger, it's like China trying to actually keep that in check, that North Korea. So, if we're looking at triangles, we can broaden it globally and look at the strength of that coalition. But I think, my bets are still with the coalition that's bound by kind of shared interests in a global order that brings mutual gains, right? Versus that which China looks at like, oh, don't go out of line. You're actually going to be hurting our interests. And, the secret's out. Like, this order is one that China just really wants to help its interests. Right. So how solid is that top cover is a question that I can't answer, but I think I'd, just like to throw into the mix of today's conversation.
All right, outstanding, Katrin. Let me come back to you on that. I know you just said that you can't answer it, but I'm gonna poke a little on that. Just pressure test it a bit. Let me ask it this way then: if you were, how is the North Korean leadership likely thinking about this, right? Because you're right. Look, what we have talked about on this show before is that every time the North tends to get out of its box one way, be it direct talks with the U.S. not too long ago, right? Being it, basically playing the old Russia, the Moscow game, right? Which the grandfather was very effective at. But you mentioned this instability or not, I guess, fluidity in this possible relationship between Moscow, Beijing, and Pyongyang. What would the North likely be doing in this to try to capitalize in the most effective way to take advantage of this perhaps fleeting, or at least the window is open for a short-term opportunity?
I would say not rocking the boat with China. Right, doing just enough to, they share this, they like poking at the US, but they know what China cares about. I mean, I would be very surprised at this stage, although for many, really months and years, we've been talking about the 7th nuclear test. But I would be surprised if that were the October surprise, because, that would definitely irk China. And therefore, it has a potential to really mess with Russia, too, right? Because the last thing Russia wants is to mess up its, these two sanction busting countries, like with this munitions flow from North Korea to Russia. Now, if you get more international attention on, maybe China coming back a little bit towards a sanctions type of activity, or not, and maybe abstaining, from some kind of resolution instead of vetoing it, and like tiptoeing and nudging toward that US-led bloc, that would create big problems for the two forces of top cover for North Korea. So that's how that's why this uranium enrichment visit is interesting, because it's like that happy medium. It's like showing capabilities, showing to audiences around the world, this is what a developed program looks like, getting the optics matter, right? As Sid correctly said, we knew about these facilities, but showing a picture actually can seep into minds, right? And maybe even audiences within the United States are leaning towards more of a arms control approach, threat reduction approach. Look at that. Like, are we really going to be able to reverse that? So that's a happy medium type of step, right? And so I guess that's, it's kind of doing but some things that would surprise me would be those that it knows better, because it knows what irks China, and that would really mess up its top cover right now.
All right, outstanding. Katrin, you teed up the next segment of the show, and this segment is usually started by me asking a question of Victor that he doesn't answer, and he asks himself his own question and goes on to it. But we're going to try, because you have set it up so well, and Sid has been chatting with me in the chat room about this line of questioning. So I feel like we're going to try to like the Lilliputans, kind of to try to hem down Victor, in a way here. But let me try to bridge this. And Victor, obviously, comments welcome, all seriousness, on the previous interventions. But let me try to pivot this in a minute, just in a moment. Katrin rightly pointed out some discussion here in the U.S. about arms control, right? Approach, does denuclearization make sense as a policy anymore, right? That chatter, one. Two, the other piece is, with the election looming, you have, on the one hand, arguable rough continuity between Biden and Harris, right? But could be a policy review in order, right? On the other hand, you have, if former President Trump comes back, you have all sorts of questions about the alliance, right? Direct negotiations, special measures agreement, the future of friendshoring, right? Trilateral relationship as well, right? So I guess the question here, Victor, is how does this bucket of issues influence the policy direction of the U.S. going forward, right? Do you think we might see a recalibration in policy in Washington in and around or immediately following the election? Victor, the floor is yours, and I look forward to the non-answer answer. Full stop there.
Okay. So all right. So I will make 4 quick points, and the fourth one will address your question. The first point is on the degree of cooperation between Russia and China that has been alluded to already. I think like we really got this wrong. I mean, I think that the U.S., we have traditionally had a blind spot when it comes to Russia, China. It dates all the way back to the Sino-Soviet split, where scholars and experts didn't predict the Sino-Soviet split until 10 years after it happened in 1969. Like, there was one scholar, Don Zagori, he was the only one that thought that there could be that wrote about the Sino-Soviet conflict. So that's one, and again, so it's a blind spot again. So, and the second point is on Russia DPRK, many of the Russia experts I talked to saw this as largely tactical. But I agree with Sid's comments in the chat that this is much more than tactical, and it could outlast Putin. And that leads to the third point, which is, how patient can China be? Right? I mean, this is clearly not something that China likes, even though they're in bed with the Russians right now. This is certainly part of what Russia's doing that they don't like. I read something recently from some Korean economists who track this a lot more closely than I do, that Sino-DPRK trade today is still not up to pre-pandemic levels. So that either means that the North Koreans are like not looking to China for trade, or the opening hasn't fully been complete. But the absence of normal levels of trade with China certainly say something about Chinese influence in North Korea. And so the point there is, how long can the Chinese accept this, right, before they start to try to weigh in? And is that something that works to our advantage? Because if it makes it difficult if it does anything to upset the sort of China-Russia relationship, I think that's to our interest. On the point about threat reduction versus denuclearization, yes, there's a lot of discussion out there. I think it's kind of a false comparison, because I don't think the United States will ever give up denuclearization as the goal. But clearly, interim steps to get to denuclearization will require measures that one person can say it's a first step towards denuclearization. Another person could look at that and say it's threat reduction. Like, it's a Rorschach test. It can be either of those things. So I think it's false comparison. But I do agree with what's suggested in your question, which is, depending on who wins in November, we could have vastly different policies, right? Vastly different policies. The degree to which the North Koreans are going to be willing to engage with a new U.S. Harris administration, I think they'll start by doing something to punch us in the nose first, and still avoid dialogue. With Trump, Trump's the only person probably who's had any sort of dialogue with North Korea over the past 4 years, right? I mean, I don't know for sure, but that'd be my guess, with all the love letters and whatever. And that could go in a completely different direction. And as you said, in addition to Trump hammering the South Koreans on trade, $45 billion trade surplus, who knows what he'll do with Chorus, right? The free trade agreement. And then all the other issues that the Biden administration has worked so hard on with Korea, trilateral, the export control, supply chains. It could just all go in a vastly different direction.
All right, outstanding, Victor. And then one quick follow-up. So you're suggesting, and just quickly here, that if President Trump comes back to power, you could see a resumption of dialogue, and it probably dovetails off of the comments that Allison Hooker, former NSC official under the Trump administration, made on this show, that dialogue could resume, but it's unlikely that President Trump would do the asking, right? So you're likely to see, perhaps entreaties from Pyongyang to Washington to resume dialogue. Is that a fair statement there?
I think it would start with a flowery congratulatory letter from the North Korean leader to Trump for returning to the White House. I think that's how it would start.
Excellent. It's how basically I decide whether to do things or not. Flowery congratulatory letters. Anyway, so it works. It's ubiquitous, and it's a fact. Over to Jung really quickly. I'm going to mix up the order, and we're kind of running out of time. We got about 5 minutes left here, but Jung, first, I just wanted to make a comment on to add to the discussion here on the more strategic nature of the relationship between Russia and North Korea. Your excellent comments on the North Koreans kind of drafting in on this growing group of like-minded countries that are in opposition to the U.S., right? The axis of upheaval, to use Richard Fontaine's suggestion, just to add the color there. But question to you is similar to what I was asking Victor. Policy direction, U.S.-ROC alliance, election, impact on North Korea policy going forward and behaviors.
Yeah, thanks. Very quickly, I would say that this new world order and the way that North Korea has been working itself into this anti-West coalition. To Katrin's question, very good question about how solid is this top cover. The greatest gift that Russia has given to North Korea is that it's its ability to hedge against China. And I think that if there is a driver for any kind of conversation that North Korea wants to have with a potential next Trump administration, that would be another bonus to hedge against China and Russia, right? So to the extent that that North Korea can play these potentially three great powers against each other, I think would be something to watch and something that we want to make sure to keep an eye on. And I think that this confidence that Sid has talked about, it has also in the fraying of the UN Security Council, it has really changed Kim's incentive structure. So Kim doesn't really need the US for sanctions removal or sanctions lifting. And if Kim can grow the economy with Russian tourists and Chinese tourists, I saw that the Swedes had just gone back into Pyongyang, to the extent that that opens the aperture for greater economic engagement on North Korea's terms, and the way that they can play Russia and China against each other, and play on China's fears about being pushed out, or Russia's fears about being pushed out, or the US being left on the sidelines. I think that would be something that I think Kim is looking to do.
All right, outstanding, Jung. Great intervention there. Sid, over to you. Same question to you. Same bucket of issues rather than a precise question. Over, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. You know, on August 4th, during the ceremony at which the 250 MRLs missiles were handed over to the forward line unit, Kim Jong-un stated in the middle of his remarks, "There's no reason to rest content with our current level of war deterrent." And I think this speaks to, you know, what we've seen since really 2019 is a matter of fact, no apologies, you know, pursuit of quantitative and qualitative growth with no indication it's willing to sit down and talk about limits on that growth. In fact, it would run counter to their emphasis on their sovereign right, the security environment that in which they reside, and their conclusions that there's an inevitable hostile nature to the policies of South Korea and the policy of the United States, making improvement of relations with either of them not necessary and actually detrimental in a way to North Korea's interests. And I think, you know, it may be that Kim Jong-un would not appreciate a Donald Trump victory, and that it would put on his table a difficult challenge of having to resist or negatively respond to the inevitable outreach that will come from Donald Trump. It'll be much easier for him to say no to a Harris administration. I think as we look at the possibilities and we think about the worst case scenarios, depending on what side of the aisle you sit on, of a Trump or a Harris approach to North Korea, we never should forget North Korean agency. And that, you know, at this point in time, again, we've all sat in that seat. We've all been on the other end of unresponded to emails or phone calls. And there's no reason to think that the next administration will be any different. That said, I do think that the argument of Donald Trump that, you know, it makes sense to have a line of dialogue with a dangerous dictator. Don't we want to have that as a way for, you know, escalation control, et cetera, et cetera? That may become more persuasive as we move forward. So, and to the degree that Kim might see some value in responding to that at that time, perhaps it's possible. But for now, my money's on a protracted period of just simply refusing to engage whoever is elected in November.
All right, one comment here, then we got to go to Katrin and Victor for final comments because we're running out of time here. But to Katrin's point, one interesting thing about a possible Trump administration is a rapid wind down of the Ukraine war and what implications that could have, right, on this new world order, to borrow a phrase from both Sid and the first President Bush. All right, Katrin, final comment to you, and then I'm going to come to Victor to close this out.
Yeah, I mean, so much brought up. I'll throw one thing out there just as an observation. Like, the one country that we haven't mentioned in this session is South Korea, right? How effectively North Korea has squeezed South Korea out of the picture. Okay, and what are the implications of that? So I'll just leave that there. Also, other leadership changes on the horizon. I mean, Japan going through a leadership transition, and eventually in South Korea as well. How much can the U.S. side hold together its strong coalition in this new threat environment under new leadership is another a very important question that we'll just have to watch and hope for the best.
All right, outstanding. I was trying to get the South Koreans in there. I just didn't. I think probably didn't wedge it in hard enough under the alliance context. But great point, Katrin. Thanks again for bringing that up. Victor, final word to you.
I second the point on Japan. I mean, we have a leadership change coming in Japan imminently, and the degree to which we can hold together the Camp David trilateral, I think I think we should do a show on it. I mean, I think it's a big change coming in Japan, and lots of concerns about the future of the trilateral.
All right, outstanding. On that note, Victor, gavel down on another great episode of the CSIS Capital Cable. Thanks to all of our panelists, Katrin, Sid, Jung, outstanding work as always. My only regret is we should have done an hour. We just ran out of time, or maybe an hour and a half. I mean, this is just a great group, great lineup. And so with that, I'm going to say, just remember KBO coming to hurtling to the postseason here. Doosan hanging on to fourth place, trying to eke up to third. Samsung, surprise, 16 games over 500, solid second place. Unbelievable KBO season. And with that, we are out. I'm going to go hit the buffet at the Delta Lounge. Victor, I'm going to bring you some hard-boiled eggs. I've got those. I can bring them right up the road from Nashville if you want. Anyway, all right, excellent. All right, thanks, everybody. Thanks. Excellent session. See you next week. See you in 2 weeks. I'm sorry.